At Team Toyota, they've been selling and servicing new and used Toyotas in your community for over 50 years, and you can reserve your next new Toyota with them today. You'll get a realistic timeline, and even in this crazy market, they won't charge you over MSRP. Or don't wait at all. With over 75 certified Toyotas, including a bunch of RAV4 and Highlanders, you can drive one home today. And you can always trust them to maintain your current vehicle. Their service and collision centers are high-tech, comfortable, and will save you time and money. Team Toyota can help you go anywhere you want, but they'll always be your hometown team. Just visit teamtoyota.net and choose from 3 locations in Langhorne, Glen Mills, or Princeton. Hey folks, welcome to the Phillies Talk podcast presented by Team Toyota. Jim Salisbury and Corey Seidman here with you as MLB's offseason has started to get underway. There hasn't been major activity yet, but there will be in the coming weeks and months. Perhaps the biggest storyline relating to the Phillies right now, Jim, is not free agency related or based on who they could add, but it's Bryce Harper's health. We're going to get an update here in the short term as to whether Harper's going to need elbow surgery. He was able to play through it, obviously DHing throughout the second half of 2022, well, really after the second week of 2020, the 2022 season. Where do things stand right now with Harper? Where do you see this going?
Yeah, well, the Phillies have been keeping a close eye on this. Immediately after the World Series ended last week, they started the evaluation process. And today he's going to visit with Dr. Neil Elatrash in Los Angeles. He's the Dodgers team doctor. He has a relationship with Scott Boras and the Scott Boras agency, obviously the group that represents Bryce. Dr. Elatrash also looked at Bryce after he broke his left thumb in June. Subsequently, Harper had the surgery back here in Philly. But it's kind of typical Bryce, typical Scott Boras. Cover all the bases, use all your resources to come to a conclusion on a really important decision. Is surgery needed? Are you going to have surgery? We're going to find out in the short term. He's like you said, he's being evaluated today in LA, and I would expect something maybe later today, Monday or Tuesday morning. We'll find out their course of action, surgery or kind of stay the course. Maybe, if they stay the course, then they've seen enough healing in there to continue down this road. If it's surgery, it could be one of 2 procedures, one that might take a little longer rehab, one that might take a little less rehab. But I still think either way, we're going to see him play next year because he should be able to hit. So we'll find out here, hopefully in the short term, how they're going to move forward with this next step of Bryce Harper's recovery this winter.
So, Jim, there's a couple ripple effects to that. If Harper did need surgery and was going to miss time early next year, that would impact some of the avenues the Phillies explore this offseason, right? They would need offense. They could potentially be needing a DH type. So let's start there.
Yeah, they could. But I would also say this, even if he has full-blown Tommy John surgery, it's quite conceivable he could be back in the lineup as a DH, stay away from throwing, but could be a DH much like he was this year, in maybe 7 months. Like, I think the template there is Shohei Ohtani of the Angels, pitcher, hitter, pitcher, slugger. He had the Tommy John surgery, didn't pitch for a whole year, but he was able to come back 7 months post-op and be a DH. So we're farther into the offseason, though, than the Angels were with Ohtani. So this thing is up in the air. I don't know that they'd go out and sign a DH type. I think I think they have some of those guys. You have a left-handed bat in Derek Hall, did a pretty good job when Harper was out. But they always bring in guys around the edges, and so maybe they do. But as far as what they're focused on this offseason is one thing: getting better, getting those final 2 wins and winning a World Series. And if you look at the lineup and the way they're constructed on the field, there's not a lot of flexibility there. unless they subtract people in trades, which they're creative, they're going to listen on everything. But the one area where they have flexibility is the middle infield. And oh, by the way, that's the strongest area in this free agent market with the, I guess you could say, an historic shortstop class with four really good ones. And um, given where they want to go, given the fact that they want to improve, given the fact that they have spent before, they have a history of spending, and I don't think they're going to stop now. As we sit here in the middle of November, I'd be surprised if they don't end up with one of those top shortstops. I would. I'd be surprised. Um, we'll see how it goes. I mean, we know the names: Turner, Correa, Bogarts, Swanson. Um, every one of them have a fit in a different way, or would fit in a different way, but every one of them are quality. And the Phillies have a quality team looking to make the next step, and they are. I can tell you this: they are committed to improving, and that's going to be one way to improve their team. Is come out of there with one of those shortstops, moving Bryson Stott to second base, and going to work on that pitching staff because they're going to need help in the pitching department as well. And I expect them to be involved with all the top pitchers, all of them. We've mentioned Carlos Rodon before. Chris Bassett's a good one. We've seen him pitch a lot against the Phillies. He really pitches with a lot of edge. He's aggressive. Rodon's very aggressive too. So that's a perfect segue. I expect the Phillies to be aggressive this winter.
So, I want to talk about the shortstops. Maybe we'll double back to that. But starting pitching is a big question mark here. You mentioned a couple there.
Mhm.
Carlos Rodon is going to be, there's going to be a ton of teams interested in him based on the high strikeouts. He led all of baseball last season with 12 strikeouts per 9 innings, whiffing 237 and 178 innings. That represented a career high workload for Rodon, who is going to be entering his age 30 season. He's never pitched that this past season, the only season he's ever reached 170 innings.
Mhm.
There's going to be other big name pitchers who become available. I just
Mhm.
wonder if this is the right fit for the Phillies, a team that already has four
Yeah.
giant contracts on the roster, the likelihood or the possibility that you might never get 170, 180 innings out of Rodon if you sign him to a huge 4 or 5 year deal.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, he basically stayed healthy last year, his walk year. Um, it's a little similar to Zach Wheeler when he was with the Mets. Had some trouble staying healthy, had some injury issues, but those last two seasons stayed pretty healthy and was able to parlay that into a nice deal. Um, I think Rodon's deal would be probably, I'm sure Scott Boras is looking for north of that, but I mean, that's why I mentioned a guy like Bassett. I think Tyler Anderson is out there. He's a guy they tried to trade before. So I do see them making a move on the free agent pitching front. Um, and I think they need to because, Wheeler and Nola, um, one is going to turn 30, one's going to turn like 32, and they're high mileage guys and experience some fatigue down the stretch. You got Ranger Suarez, but I think there's a need to augment that. And you have Bailey Falter coming back, who I think showed a lot of value last year and can still be quite valuable. And of course, you're going to have Andrew Painter coming. Who knows when? He might be there early. He might be there, you know, a month or two in. But he's coming. He's coming fast, and he should be able to help them. But they're going to have to really be judicious with his workload. Got to 100 innings this year, but if he's contributing in the big leagues like we all expect him to, they're going to have to, nip and tuck here and there to try to get him through a whole season. Be careful because he's a young developing arm. Be careful with the innings jump that he might experience. So that's where a guy like Falter and any depth that you can add, I think would be really valuable. And given the rotation a sixth day now and then, or adding a sixth starter now and then to give everybody a little bit of blow. Your two top guys who are 30 and over, and your young guy who's building his workload. So they definitely need to continue to add pitching. And like I said, John Middleton is not like committed to spending money as much as he's committed to improving the ball club. And if it costs money, he's going to do it.
Well, in talking about depth, right? The Phillies in the playoffs did not have a number 4 starter they could rely on. That would be a target. They also, throughout this regular season in 2022, spent most of it without like a seventh guy. And a seventh guy is very important because rarely do you go through a year with 5 starters. Rarely do you go through a year with 6 starters. It would be probably most ideal if the Phillies could have Bailey Falter as like that seventh guy and have 6 more in front of him. That way they could use Falter in a variety of roles if need be. You talked about Tyler Anderson there. You talked about Chris Bassett there. Bassett's a guy who's actually, I think he's older than a lot of people assume. He's already in his mid-30s, but a mid-rotation piece there, a guy who could fit nicely into a team's 3 spot in the rotation. I wonder, Jim, and I wonder what you think of this and how much you think front offices are going to be factoring this in. The elimination of the shift. Guys who allowed a lot of ground balls in recent years that had success because those balls were gobbled up by a shifting defense, playing up the middle or over shifting against a left-handed hitter. That is going to have it would seem to have, it's going to have a drastic impact on a lot of pitchers around baseball. There's going to be more base runners. Home runs aren't going anywhere. So when those home runs are hit, there's going to be more guys on base. You could see some guys who had like 3 ERAs jump up a full run. The pitchers that stick out to me the most are the guys who allow a ton of ground balls, guys who allow a higher than average level of hard contact and don't miss many bats. I mean, I think back to someone like Jose Quintana, for example, who was so good for the Cardinals in the second half of last season, pitchers of that ilk. Just how much do you think the Phillies are going to be baking that into their explorations of the starting pitching market this winter?
Well, they have built what I would call an analytics powerhouse over there, so they're going to consider everything. Um, Personally, I'll still take a guy who keeps the ball on the ground any day, especially in Citizens Bank Park. But they're going to look at all of that stuff, and that's going to, increase the value of some guys, decrease the value of some guys. We're already hearing that, left-handed bats are going to be more coveted because, you're not going to have the second baseman playing in right field anymore, stealing hits. I can only imagine Ryan Howard wishing that was the case late in his contract. So I think they're going to consider all of those things. But in the final analysis, I expect this team to be aggressive in that shortstop market. We all know Trey Turner and the buzz surrounding him. I expect them to be, aggressive in gathering information on all 4 of those guys. And like I said, I'd be surprised if they didn't come out of here with one of them this winter because they want to get better. And those are really quality players. But we can't ignore the fact that they need more starting pitching. They need effective starting pitching. They need innings. They need depth because, as I said, you have Wheeler, who is going to does he turn 32 or 33 next May? I think, do you have that?
Looking it up. Keep going.
Yeah. So you have Wheeler. Nola's going to turn 30 next June.
Yeah, Wheeler turns 33 in May.
And you're going to have Wheeler. Look at that. Just you're the best. Wheeler turning 33 in May. So, and they're both high mileage guys. And I'm not trying to sound like the alarms here, but you got to be cognizant of that, especially framed against their history, where both have shown signs of fatigue late in seasons. In Wheeler's case this year, he went on the IL late in the season with elbow inflammation or tendonitis. So, you have every reason to believe that they're going to be fine, but you have to take the proper steps to have insurance and make sure you have that depth because, as you mentioned, you need 7 and you need 8, you need 9 to get through. So, Falter becomes valuable in terms of just being able to use him and have him pitch effectively like he did down the stretch this year and be a contributor to that rotation. But it's also to give guys an occasional blow, I think. Be it the guys at the top, possibly an extra day here or there, or a guy who's going to be breaking in like a painter. And I would even say, Griff McGarry, I think we'll probably see him in 2023. So they need to build more pitching depth. So I expect to see them quite active in the middle infield and adding a pitcher. And then, they're going to have to flesh out that bullpen. Connor Brogdon was a great sign in the postseason. His emergence, you just hope he continues that next season. He could be a real valuable piece down there. But they want to get better. And when you came 2 wins from the World Series, winning the World Series, that's a pretty high bar.
Yeah, Brogdon was really effective in the playoffs, kind of flew under the radar based on how many other players were performing for the Phillies during that month. But I believe that he ended his postseason with 8 1/3 consecutive scoreless innings
Mhm.
And just think about how many times in recent years we've had the conversation after a Phillies season that it's hard to judge the relievers on the second half based on how low the pressure
Yeah,
was. Well,
yeah.
this was the exact opposite. He's pitching in the playoffs, the highest of stakes. So that was very good to see. And, hopefully he'll be able to push that forward. Now, Jim, talking about those shortstops, you referenced Turner and Bogarts, who the Phillies have been linked to heavily. Turner, Bryce Harper's former Washington teammate. Bogarts, who played under Dave Dombrowski in Boston. There's also Carlos Correa and Dansby Swanson. Do you think the Phillies would be happy with any of the four of them? I mean, we're talking about different strengths. Like Turner, probably the best offensive player of the group. Correa, probably the best all-around player of the group. Bogarts, the safest to hit like 320. And Swanson might give you the most bang for your buck. So there are things to like about all four guys.
Yeah, I mean, you ask me if I think they'd be happy with any one of them. Yeah, I think so because I think each one of them makes you better. Maybe better in different ways. Maybe one guy makes you even better than the next guy, but I think all three of them push you forward and make you better and make you a better club in trying to chase down your goals. So I think they would be happy with any one of those guys, and I'm sure a particular one, whoever the top target is, would make them happiest of all. Personally, I think Trey Turner is just a great fit. I think he's an exciting player. I've heard everybody says, Bogarts is played for Dave Dombrowski in Boston. I don't put a lot of stock in that. But if people want to, they can. I mean, he certainly knows him. I mean, I think that helps in doing your background on a guy. You know a guy firsthand, but it's going to come down to money. But Bogarts is a hell of a player. We see Swanson all the time. He's an outstanding player, and Correa is a great player. So, um, the Phillies in free agency the last 5 years they play with the big boys, and this is a great class of free agent shortstops at a position where you have need on a team that's trying to close the gap and get back to the World Series and win those two more games. I think they're going to end up with one of them. So it would surprise me, I should say, if they don't end up with one of them. But just given their history and given their need, but we'll see.
Jim, this playoff run lasted so long that the winter meetings are just around the corner. They're what, like 3 weeks away, December 4th through 7. The
Mhm.
Rule 5 draft taking place at the end on December 7th. But tomorrow is the date by which teams need to add eligible players to their 40-man roster to protect them from the Rule 5 draft. Is there anybody in the Phillies minor league system who sticks out to you that is worth protecting to avoid another team from snatching them up 3 weeks from now?
Yeah, definitely. Johan Rojas, the young center fielder with speed, kind of blinding tools, made it to Double A this year. Yeah, he's a guy that they have to protect. I mean, we've seen him in spring training. He's one of these guys that really drips with tools. So I think you'll see him protected. I'd be very surprised if he wasn't. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. Eric Miller, left-handed pitcher possibility. They got a big bearish right-hander down there named McKinley Moore. I'm curious to see if he gets a big hard thrower. Was in Reading this year. I'm curious to see possibly if he gets protected. We'll keep an eye on that for Tuesday night. In the short term, we'll keep an eye on Bryce Harper for some news there. That's a big one.
Yeah, it sure is. There's already been some movement around the NL East. The Mets re-signing their closer Edwin Diaz. The Braves signed Nick Anderson, which is kind of an interesting move. He was dominant with Tampa Bay during a 2-year span, but hasn't been able to stay healthy over the last like 3 or so seasons. But he's the kind of guy that I thought could have made sense for the Phillies. Could have made sense for a ton of teams based on a price tag, like a high upside, low risk signing. I think he only got like 850,000 guaranteed from the Braves. You see all the time that pitchers who sign for cheap end up having good seasons. Pitchers who sign big contracts don't. Like last year, Phillies gave out $6 million to Juris Familia, $6 million to Brad Hand. Familia was gone by midseason. Hand was ineffective by later in the season and wasn't really trustworthy in the playoffs. The Phillies haven't had a ton of success going for that veteran short-term route in the bullpen. I mean, Corey Knebel was pitching well prior to his season-ending injury. That was a 1-year, $10 million deal. Do you think the Phillies are looking for like quality, quantity? How do you see them approaching this bullpen market?
In the bullpen, I think you can often go quantity and hope to unearth quality. They kind of did that last year, but they went for quality right out of the gate in Knebel, and then they, signed a bunch of guys under him, including those veterans you mentioned for $6 million each, Hand and Familia. But you look at a guy like Bellotti, who was kind of a quantity signing, and I think he gave him a lot of quality innings, tough against right-handers. So he was kind of that marginal pickup that really gave you something. So I think they're just going to look for anybody that can make them better. But I do think, especially in the bullpen, um, especially as the winter goes on, you see teams adding, 4 and 5 guys down there, maybe some guys on a non-roster deal, in hopes of unlocking something, or in hopes of a veteran bouncing back. We see that all the time in the bullpen. But it doesn't surprise me. The Braves were aggressive on Anderson. They're aggressive on everything. They're aggressive on everything. So we'll see what happens there.
Well, bullpens are only becoming more important by the year. I mean, we see that in the playoffs pretty much every October now, that the starting pitchers, it doesn't matter if you're Justin Verlander or Framber Valdez going deep into games all throughout the regular season, you're pretty much out after 6 innings based on how nasty some of these bullpens are. Be curious to see how that plays out in free agency with the game shifting that way more. Does it mean that relievers get paid more? Those are all things to consider. The
We've been
Phillies right
talking
now.
about that. I mean, we're talking about reliever salaries for a decade. I remember writing about, Rail Cormier getting a nice deal, and talking to relievers about that. And I mean, the price of good relievers continually goes up, and those guys are getting paid what they should be. So the Phillies, I think they're going to have to spend some money down there, but I also think they're going to look at some quantity additions and hope to get. And there also could be, I look at that kid Andrew Baker, who pitched at Double-A, hard throwing right-hander. I think he's going to be a guy we're going to see in Clearwater, and a guy that could be in that bullpen. I mean, the Phillies have had, you look at Brogdon, he came along, and there are other examples, but he could be a guy that comes along as sort of a homegrown guy, and maybe becomes a contributor. Over the years they've had Dominguez come along as a homegrown guy. I mean, Hector Neris was a homegrown guy. Andrew Baker could be a guy that helps in Philadelphia next season.
The Phillies, like core 4 relievers as of this moment on the roster, Dominguez and Alvarado, and then you have Brogdon and Bellotti, though ideally Brogdon and Bellotti are probably closer to like your 5th and 6th best relievers in a bullpen. So the Phillies do need to go about filling those roles vacated by Zach Eflin and David Robertson in the playoffs. Those were 2 of their 4 most important relievers. So a lot of offseason left. We'll get news on Bryce Harper. Obviously there will be more developments in the shortstop market, the starting pitching market, and we've talked relievers, and we'll continue to deal with all those positions here moving forward on the Phillies Talk podcast. So have a great week, everybody. We'll be back soon.